Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. Extra amazing because Krystal is back. It's great to see you, Krystal. What do we have today?
It is great to be back. Thank you so much, Saagar, by the way, for covering for me and the team, and Ryan and everybody who filled in. We have a lot to get to this morning, though. As Saagar covered for you yesterday, 3 U.S. service members are dead after a suicide drone attack in Jordan. What are they even doing there? What does that mean for broader conflagrations in the Middle East? A lot to talk about there. We're also following the U.S. cut funding for a critical UN aid agency dedicated to Palestinians. This, of course, comes as the ICJ ruled that Israel is plausibly committing genocide in the Gaza Strip. Break that down for you. Nancy Pelosi floating a wild new Russiagate conspiracy. Gotta hear this one to believe it. Truly astonishing. The mayor of Dearborn, Michigan is actually going to join us. So he refused to meet with Biden campaign officials. This in spite of the fact that he is a longtime Democrat over Biden's unconditional support for Israel. So we're going to talk to him about that and how he is thinking about the general election matchup likely between Biden and Trump. Taylor Swift AI nudes causing a whole fracas all the way up to the White House. Massive debate about, what to do about this, if anything should be done about this, et cetera. So we'll talk about that. And Saagar is looking at the political divide between young men and young women, which seems to only be widening.
Yes, that's right, Krystal. Before we do get to that, though, we want to say thank you also to our premium subscribers helping us for gearing up for election season. We've got the discount going on right now. We have our RFK Jr. focus group, which will be coming to everybody next week. We're really excited to bring everybody that. Actually, it turns out while the delay was not something that we wanted due to the snow, that, there's quite a lot of relevance with RFK Jr. right now. And we're going to have a lot to cover tomorrow as well. Lots of domestic stories, the border situation, all that. But we wanted to make sure we cover our bases with foreign policy today just because of the tragic death of those service members. And unfortunately, Krystal, even worse, calls for war with Iran pervading the bipartisan consensus here in Washington.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So let's start with that news, which is certainly the top story of the day with potentially massive and terrifying implications. Let's put this up on the screen. As I said, 3 U.S. troops killed and up to 34 injured in Jordan. This due to a so-called suicide drone strike that the Biden administration is linking to these Iranian-backed militias. I can read you from a little bit of this story. Biden's response, he says, have no doubt we will hold all those responsible to account at a time and in a manner of our choosing. Iran's mission to the UN said in a statement that Tehran was not involved in the attack. Iran had no connection, had nothing to do with the attack on the U.S. base. According to that mission, they added there is a conflict between U.S. forces and resistance groups in the region, which reciprocate retaliatory attacks. We could go ahead and put up on the screen a map so that you get a sense of where exactly these attacks were happening. You can see they're right on the border here of Jordan and Syria. Apparently, this facility that was targeted is referred to as Tower 22, very, very close to that Jordan-Syria border. I mean, Saagar, there's so much to say about this. First of all, anytime our service members are attacked in this region, I'm sure plenty of Americans are going, what are they even doing in this region? Why are they even there to be sitting ducks for these types of attacks? Number 2, sadly, this was entirely predictable result of Biden's policy vis-a-vis Israel. Since October 7th, and we can put this up on the screen, this map, you guys haven't heard that much about these in the news, even though you should have. There have been well over 150 of these types of attacks. And tragically, it was only a matter of time before one of the attacks broke through and claimed the lives of U.S. service members. So there is no doubt in my mind, this is very likely linked directly to the Biden administration's policy vis-a-vis Israel. Part of how we know that is because during the time when there was a brief ceasefire, these attacks completely stopped. And so it once again raises the question of what the hell are we doing here? Even if you don't care about the moral outrage of what is happening in Gaza, the Biden policy has put our service members at risk and is directly in contravention of our own national security interests. And to me, that's what is really underscored by these unbelievably tragic deaths and avoidable deaths in the end.
Yeah, I'm really outraged by this because it was so predictable. We're sitting here for weeks just saying, listen, it's only a matter of time. It only takes one. It only takes this. And then we see, tit for tat. We go up, something gets fired at a ship. And now, this is a really horrible situation because these guys, by all accounts, were literally sleeping. So it was in the middle of the night, and a suicide drone appears to have attacked their barracks because we also saw that the number of wounded rose significantly from yesterday. It's now stands at 34, but very likely to go even higher. Unfortunately, many of the men who were wounded actually remain in critical condition and had to be airlifted out of Jordan to a nearby hospital. That also reminds us of why are 3,000 American soldiers or service members in Jordan in the first place? The ostensible purpose of this base is part of the anti-ISIS mission. I mean, when's the last time that we heard anything about what was going on with U.S. operations in Syria and in ISIS? Don't forget that belies the fact that there are a number of U.S. troops in Syria, again, with no authorization from Congress, and they have been there now for years in near permanent installations. There's a bigger defense question here, too, really about the use of these suicide drones and U.S. air defense systems. There had long been promises, and both to the troops and others, that we had adequate force protection for our service members who are so forward deployed in Syria and elsewhere, saying we had all of these advanced air defense systems that were in place to make sure that something like this would happen. Obviously, completely failed in this regard, and now 3 of our service members are dead, and more than 3 dozen nearly have been wounded, and some critically, who have been injured, and who knows, what the prognosis remains for them. It is a bigger, major strategic question about what are our service members doing here. Don't forget either, Krystal, in the initial statement, President Biden blamed Iranian-backed groups in Iraq and in Syria. So it raises questions there about what exact groups that these are, whether they're in Iraq. Don't forget this. If we're going to respond, quote, hard and heavy, or whatever it is that the Lindsey Graham and all those want us to do, there is a very dangerous and diplomatic talk going on right now with Iraq. Many of the Iraqis do not want us to stay there. Our troops, the Biden administration is fighting to make sure that our troops can remain inside of the country, ostensibly for this anti-ISIS mission, more likely to do with, forward posture against Iran. Regardless, this is going to affect that if there is some sort of major retaliation inside of Iraq, which very likely could invite domestic political pushback on top of who the hell knows what goes on in Syria. But what scares me more than anything is the total unwillingness to, just throw caution to the wind right now amongst the Washington establishment. And you see direct calls, bipartisan calls right now, to strike Iranian territory, not to wipe out or even retaliate against these Iraqi and Syrian groups, but directly go to the source. And that's what we're seeing from all across the aisle immediately in the aftermath of the attack.
Yeah, so we could put some of that up on the screen. The Republicans largely jumped in most aggressively. Of course, many of these same people use any and every excuse to push for war with Iran. You've got Senator John Cornyn, target Tehran. Lindsey Graham, hit Iran now, hit them hard. Tom Cotton, my statement following the Iran-backed attacks in Jordan that killed 3 U.S. service members and injured 25. The TLDR there is also war with Iran. Tim Scott, enough is enough. Biden administration's appeasement of Iran must end. Time for clear and decisive action. Chuck Grassley, will President Biden finally take decisive action against Iran? First of all, I think it's important to say a couple things about this. Like, obviously, this is psychotic. The idea that we should just jump into a full-scale war with Iran, is not something that the American people want. It is disastrous, absolutely insane idea that goes almost without saying. I also think it's worth noting, the media always, it's almost like a verbal tick. They use this phrase like Iran-backed militias. And it is true. Obviously, they're linked, they're funded, there's, affiliations there. But you can get the impression that they're just acting 100% as puppets of Iran, and they're just doing like whatever their actions are. They're directed, directly from Tehran. And that is not the case. These groups have their own impetus. They have their own motivations. They have their own goals. They're capable of planning their own attacks. So when Iran says it wasn't us, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But I just want people to understand that these groups are not Iran. They are linked to Iran, yes. But that doesn't mean that they are directly taking their orders from Tehran.
Yeah.
The most critical piece here, I think, Saagar, is you see once again the way that the logic of escalation only ever goes in one direction. It has never been more clear that the reason these attacks are happening is directly because of our unconditional support for Israel, because of the fact that we have been a primary, we've been a primary blockade to any sort of ceasefire or longer truce. And when there was a brief ceasefire, these attacks stopped. So all of this trouble in the Middle East, the Red Sea, the Houthis, we had 2 Navy SEALs who also are dead because of our actions in the Middle East. They didn't come under direct fire, but as a result of our operations in the Red Sea, they too are dead. All of this is happening because of our policy vis-a-vis Israel. So instead of reassessing that policy and saying there's a very clear answer and solution to all of these problems, which, by the way, would also be in the best interest of humanity in the Gaza Strip, instead, it's always, we have to escalate, we have to hit them harder, we have to escalate to de-escalate, et cetera, et cetera. It's what the media pushes, it's what the political class pushes, and it always only goes in one direction.
The logic is also nonsensical. I mean, we are currently funding to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars the war in Ukraine, which has killed probably between 300,000 to 350,000 Russian soldiers. So by this logic, let's say that Russia were to use this logic, what could they say? They're like, well, the US-backed, US-linked Ukrainian government is killing our soldiers with their weapons. Actually, the link is probably even more direct because the Pentagon quite literally runs the Ukrainian military ops. And in a similar situation, we can't control everything the Ukrainian military does. Or maybe we can. But let's say that we can't, at least in that instance, as we have seen them conduct attacks deep inside of Russian territory, elsewhere, terrorist attacks, assassinations inside of Moscow. What does that mean? Under that logic, they could bomb us. They could nuke us. That's what that's what the most belligerent people inside of the Russian government are saying. They're like, how can we do this? We're not going after the source. Think about the logic of that. That means then that we would be liable for every single one of our allied governments that we supply with weapons for direct retaliation against us. And in fact, that appears to be the exact logic that these Iranian-backed groups and the Houthis and others have been using to attack the U.S. military vis-a-vis its support for Israel. So I, again, would just urge people, and everybody loves to talk about Reagan, and let's take a step back and think about what happened after the Beirut bombing against, several number of our U.S. service members were killed there under his administration. You know what he did? He pulled out. He said, at the end of the day, it's not worth it. And there were a lot more people who were killed in that attack in the 1980s than there were today. People do, forget some of the strategic actual fortitude that Reagan occasionally did have in his foreign policy, because he understood and assessed that if I were to get into a deeper, conflict here, it would not be in our direct interest. We had a direct guiding foreign policy at that time, which was confrontation with the Soviet Union and with rollback, and he determined that this was going to draw away from that goal. And he had the fortitude to be able to understand that even in America's height of its military power, that we cannot just simply have projection of force everywhere. And we're a lot weaker today than they were in the 1980s. And yet, here in Washington, that is an anathema. Even Reagan's greatest defenders, they kind of like to write off what happened in Lebanon. But in this particular case, I would say, let us call upon the wisdom of Reagan, who understood that just because U.S. service members have been killed in this instance, it does not require us to put even more in harm's way and to pour even more, basically throwing bad money after good money. You can actually understand the root of the conflict, where things are going, and very quickly surmise that what's happening in Israel and Gaza is the center of gravity in this conflict, and now directly has pulled American service members. The other thing that we forgot to mention, Krystal, is right that the 2 U.S. Navy SEALs were killed, but Michael Tracy actually reminded us this morning, don't forget, 5 Americans were also killed in a training exercise that was directly linked to what was happening. And, we can't forget their deaths either. They would not have been in that area and conducting these kinds of training operations. This was one of our most advanced elite air units, presumably either training for hostage rescue or for some sort of, conflict or in the region, and they died in a nighttime exercise, very, very nearby. So we have 10 now, basically, who can be ascribed to this. We have at least 5 who have been directly killed now in combat. And we cannot forget that and just use that as an excuse to ratchet up operations. And I just love, these GOP politicians. It's like, all right, we struck Tehran. Now what? What, you think everything's just going to go away? I mean, what's
Right.
going to happen? You know, way
Right.
more. And we just saw our air defense systems just failed in Jordan. Don't forget, the Patriots did not shoot down all those ballistic missiles inside of Iraq. You are consigning dozens, perhaps even hundreds more Americans to their death in the immediate term as a result of this policy. And nobody even talks about it.
Yeah, so a few other things I want to say about this. I mean, first of all, just keep in mind that some of these psychos, even immediately after October 7th, they were already itching
Yeah,
for
good
war
point.
with Iran and beating the war drums. They will use literally any excuse, whether it's this or anything else, to call for direct war with Iran. Number two, it's also worth keeping in mind that a broader Middle East conflagration that we are directly involved in very much serves the interests of Netanyahu specifically, who, as we've discussed ad nauseum, is, you know, on a very short leash politically, domestically. He's basically hated almost universally in Israel at this point. The only chance he has of holding on to his grip on power is to extend the war as long as possible, to expand the war in order to try to claim more military victories. Since, if we're being honest, their war on Hamas has been basically a failure. I mean, they haven't gotten the top leadership. They have. There was a Wall Street Journal report that they have something like 80% of even the tunnel network in the Gaza Strip is still intact. The number of fighters that they've been able to take out is woefully, you know, small compared to the total number of Hamas fighters that are there in the Gaza Strip. All they've been able to do is effectively, you know, destroy civilian life and make life a living hell for every one of the 2.2 million human beings who live in the Gaza Strip. So he needs military victories. That's why they're looking towards Lebanon. That's why they're looking towards this broader war, because not only his interests, but as a fantastic Haaretz analysis went through, you know, the interests of everyone who was in power on October 7th and oversaw these security intelligence failures that led to this, you know, horrific attack going forward and the failed response. All of their political heads are on the chopping block. So every one of them has, even the so-called moderates that are part of this coalition, have an interest in keeping this thing going and expanding it and drawing us directly into it. It's always important to keep in mind the motivations that these key players have as we move forward. And, you know, the last thing I'll say before we move on to Trump's statement is, sadly, just as this attack and the deaths of these U.S. service members were both predictable and preventable, if we continue in this direction, there will be more deaths. I mean, the number of attacks that have already occurred. There was a previous incident, an attack on barracks in Iraq, that we were incredibly fortunate that basically, like, the munition didn't explode. And so those service members, you know, got off with relatively minor injuries, which, by the way, you know, the U.S. government has been dramatically downplaying. Oh, it's just a little traumatic brain injury. Don't worry about it, as if that's no big deal. But we are incredibly fortunate up to this point that there weren't more lives lost of U.S. service members. So sadly, there's just no doubt, even if we continue in this direction of unconditional support for Israel and this little tit for tat without going directly at Iran, there will almost certainly be more U.S. service members who lose their lives as a result of Joe Biden not wanting to stand up to Israel and fully, unconditionally backing what they are doing in the Gaza Strip, shipping the bombs, expediting the bombs, providing them with diplomatic cover, et cetera. Let me go ahead and put up on the screen Trump's reaction. Of course, he's jumping on this and taking full advantage as he possibly can politically in a very Trumpian statement. This is like, it was a 3-part thread on Truth Social. This was the second part, which was sort of the most interesting or critical. He says, 3 years ago, Iran was weak, broke, and totally under control. Thanks to my maximum pressure policy, the Iranian regime could barely scrape $2 together to fund their terrorist proxies. Then Joe Biden came in and gave Iran billions of dollars, which the regime has used to spread bloodshed and carnage throughout the Middle East. This attack would never have happened if I was president, not even a chance. Just like the Iranian-backed Hamas attack on Israel would never have happened, the war in Ukraine would never have happened, and we would right now have peace throughout the world. Instead, we are on the brink of World War III. Talk about alternative facts and alternative history. I mean, very likely Trump's policy vis-a-vis Israel would be basically identical to Joe Biden, perhaps without the, like, moral hand-wringing, the feckless moral hand-wringing that you get occasionally from the Biden administration. So the idea that we wouldn't be still facing these attacks from various militias in the region, I think is pretty fanciful.
I will at least give Trump this. He didn't call for war with Iran, so I'm going to call it a net benefit for me. Or at least it's like at least he hasn't come to that. And I've seen Vivek Ramaswamy, Tucker Carlson, and others issue very forceful criticism of some of the people who are calling for it. I will say, politically, I've always said this, it is the greatest talking point in the world for him to just be like, it didn't happen under me, and it's happening under Biden. So you can definitely be assured that that will be featured in debates, campaign commercials, and others for a return to normalcy, even if it may not be true, even if what he would have done, if he were in the White House or not, but he can have the statement of, well, it would never have happened if I was still the president. So anyway, yeah, I wanted to flag that in particular because electorally, let's say that foreign policy does become a deciding factor in the election, or instead of foreign policy, think of it like the withdrawal from Afghanistan. The withdrawal from Afghanistan, nobody really voted on the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Nobody would even particularly say that's the #1 reason. But there was a feeling of chaos, malaise, and of things being out of control under Biden that led to the initial approval rating that he had over 50% dip below. So with this, I could see Trump trying to make this as part of an overall case. The problem is, of course, if he's like, well, return to normal, is that he can't himself be trying to instill chaos. But there is, it could be a potent talking point if Biden finds himself deep enough.
Listen, Biden's support for Israel, as we're going to talk to the mayor of Dearborn, who's a Democrat, who wouldn't even meet with his campaign team because he's disgusted over Biden's support for what he describes and what the the ICJ has now said is plausibly a genocide that we are very much complicit in. So I just saw a poll that came out. Biden's approval rating among 18 to 29-year-olds is 27%. 27%. So already, this is an electoral disaster. I mean, that's the least of our concerns right now, but it's already an electoral disaster. You continue with the escalations. You continue allowing U.S. service members to be killed in their beds in the Middle East, in countries that the American people don't even know we still have service members in. It's absolutely a disaster. The last thing before we move on to what's going on with UNRWA aid suspension, I just want to give people the numbers so you understand when I say this is directly linked to the policy with Israel. These attacks are directly correlated to it because we can see in the numbers, this was highlighted by friend of the show, Dr. Trita Parsi, who said there were about 60 attacks by these type of militias against U.S. troops between January 2021 and March 2023. So that's over basically a 2-year period. After the Gaza war, just since October 7th, there have been more than 160 attacks, except during the 6 days when there was a ceasefire in Gaza, then the attacks completely stopped. We know what the answer is to bring safety and security to our service members in the region, not to mention to deal with the humanity of people in Gaza. And by the way, also the ultimate long-term security of citizens of Israel. We know what the answer is, but our insane foreign policy, completely unmoored from reality, leads them to take actions that they don't even think are going to succeed. That's what the other thing I keep thinking about, Saagar, we have them Biden admitting that he knew the, Red Sea attacks on the Houthi rebels. He knew they weren't going to work, but they were going to continue anyway. It's like, then what the hell are we doing? We have Tony Blinken admitting there's no military solution to Hamas. Then what the hell are we supporting? And it's the same thing. It doesn't need a logic. They just escalate because they think that's the thing that people expect them to do. And when you got psychos like Lindsey Graham and co out there pushing them to go to war with Iran, it is an unbelievably dangerous situation.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.